The world of Elden Ring is filled with mysterious forces, but perhaps the most intriguing are the Outer Gods, eldritch beings that attempt to influence the lands between. Among these, the one that has always fascinated me the most is the Formless Mother, a sinister entity that communicates entirely through blood, leading her followers to become obsessed with its spilling. Mohg, who becomes her most devoted servant, communes with her through blood incantations and dreams of establishing a new dynasty, the Mohgwyn Dynasty, and with him as the Lord of Blood. Like the other demigods, Mohg claimed a great rune and staked his claim as the next lord, hoping to usher in the rule of the Order of Blood. Yet Mohg's story in the base game ended when the Tarnished killed him and claimed his rune. Thankfully, Shadow of the Erdtree has expanded on the Lord of Blood's story, adding more details about his motivations, ultimate fate, and insights into the culture of those who follow him, thanks to Ansbach. In this lore video, I want to provide a comprehensive overview of Mohg's entire story, and an analysis of the Formless Mother, from the Blood Fiends to the collapse of the Mohgwyn Dynasty. At the beginning of this video, I want to give a massive shout out to the artist Eugenia Lysa, whom I commissioned to create the fantastic Mohg and Formless Mother renders you will see throughout this video. This was a massive undertaking for Eugenia, so I would really appreciate it if you checked out her channel and socials linked below. With that said, remember to like and subscribe, and let us dive into the lore. Before we get into today's video, I would like to give a brief word from today's sponsor, me, as I am happy to announce my Elden Ring lore book, Grace Given. I have worked with the folks at Toon and Fairweather to translate my love for the Elden Ring lore into book form, which represents my appraisal of the entire lore of the base game, clocking in at 500 plus pages. The result is this beautiful collector's item, adorned with the art of Shimhack, Menace LG, Elliot Wells, and Chris Lewis Lee. This is just the initial limited launch, and down the line there will be more affordable paperback or e-editions. Check it out at the pre-order link below if you think this would be something you are interested in. Thanks for listening, and now back to the lore. Mohg's audience with the Formless Mother in the Shunning Grounds is the event that kickstarts his story, making it essential to understand this entity first and foremost. Thanks to the DLC, we have new lore that can further illuminate the nature of this being. To address the obvious, the Formless Mother is one of the beings known as the Outer Gods. There are few direct mentions of Outer Gods in the base game, but one of the 8 instances refers specifically to the Formless Mother. This reference is found in the description of Mohgwyn's sacred spear, which reads as follows: Trident of Mohg, Lord of Blood, a sacred spear that will come to symbolize his dynasty. As well as serving as a weapon, it is an instrument of communion with an outer god who bestows power upon accursed blood. The Mother of Truth desires a wound. This, of course, immediately opens up one of the most debated topics in Elden Ring's lore community. What exactly are the Outer Gods? I have discussed different possibilities in numerous videos, and I think it would be somewhat redundant to front-load this video with every possible interpretation of these beings. Instead, I would direct you to the videos you can see now on the screen, but for now, let's focus specifically on what we know about the Formless Mother, and let the conclusions form naturally. The most basic aspect of this being is revealed in her 2 interchangeable names, the Formless Mother and the Mother of Truth. There are many intriguing things to explore here, and one that stands out to me is the use of Mother in both titles, implying it is a significant aspect of her nature. As we delve into this topic, I believe you'll see that the Formless Mother has a particularly intimate relationship with many of her adherents. Vari, for example, paints a rather positive picture of the dynasty, frequently using the word love, not to mention his romanticized bouquet weapon, which turns the blood rose into a symbol of both love and violence. The nurturing element of the Formless Mother is evident in her direct and close communion with her select followers, and this influence trickles down into the mantras and practices of the dynasty itself, which we will cover later. The aspect I want to focus on next is the formless nature of this god, as this is something we can observe for ourselves when characters directly interact with her. For example, the weapon art of the Mohgwyn spear is called Bloodboon Ritual, and when used the bearer thrusts the spear into nothing, and yet the spear finds purchase and blood flows seemingly from nowhere. Its item description confirms that one is stabbing the body of the Formless Mother, with the resulting blood flame being her blood. During Mohg's fight, when he initiates his blood curse, he is directly wounding the Formless Mother. Her body is formless and omnipresent. No matter where one is, this incantation allows communion with the Formless One. This seems to be a unique characteristic of this particular outer god, as there is no uniformity of form among these deities. For example, the outer god of Rot appears to have once taken the form of a scorpion. We can assume that the form an outer god takes is reflective of the element they represent. Scorpions are often associated with poison, so it is unsurprising that this was a form the outer god of Rot adopted. In the case of the Formless Mother, her formless nature is more esoteric, but I believe it is meant to reflect the flowing mercurial nature of blood. Blood is a liquid that can run everywhere, just as the Formless Mother seems to flow everywhere alongside the mortal realm. Of course, we must also consider the medium through which this being communicates and spreads its influence: blood. We know that blood is the mother of Truth's chosen medium, because of her repeated desire for wounds, as indicated by the aforementioned Mohgwyn spear, which confirms this. Much of the practices, incantations, and imagery of the Mohgwyn Dynasty centre around the spilling of blood. Therefore, we have identified two core elements of this being. It is formless, and it communes through blood. Many of the outer gods typically have a material through which their influence spreads, with the most obvious analogy being the outer god of Rot and its scarlet rot. In areas where the Formless Mother's influence is strong, we can observe corrupted blood swamps and pustules. These fetid swamps are well described in the description of Swarm of Flies, which reads, "The new palace of the Lord of Blood lies in a swamp of festering blood, and these flies are said to spawn from excrement in that land. These swamps of festering blood breed corruption and parasites, yet they also allow the Formless Mother and her agents to extend their influence. I believe it is the influence of the Formless Mother that leads to the blood corrupting and changing the land and fauna around it. One need only look at the blood pustules and the afflicted life forms to see that this corruption is not natural. The blood swamps of Mohgwyn Palace is what the world would look like under the rule of the Mother of Truth. Sanguine nobles are able to emerge from pools of blood, as they do in both Rose Church and Mohgwyn Palace. Mohg himself materializes from a pool of blood, and it seems that the stronger the connection to the Mother of Truth, the greater the control one gains over blood. Thus, if the whole world were covered in blood, Mohg and his agents could translocate wherever they pleased. It's no surprise then that the followers of the Formless Mother are primarily concerned with spilling blood and why the god desires a wound. The more blood that is spread, the more her influence can grow. From Software has previously depicted a similar, formless, blood-obsessed being in another of their games, Erdtree from Bloodborne. Given that From Software often reiterates ideas from game to game, it's reasonable to compare these two entities, using the story of Erdtree to help inform us about the intent behind the Formless Mother. Erdtree was one of the beings in Bloodborne known as a Great One. Incidentally, I did an in-depth video on these beings, which I will link below, but let's go over some of the basic ideas that I explored in that video now. The Great Ones did not have a uniform shape, though there are certainly commonalities and broad categories among them. In that video, I argued that the higher or more advanced the Great One, the less physical it became, as they transcend the physical. The Great Ones lose the ability to reproduce, And ascending to Great One status involves aligning one's mind with eyes, i.e. gaining greater insight. It's about moving away from the physical and mundane and becoming pure consciousness. As a result, we have nearly formless Great Ones like the Wet Nurse and completely formless beings like Erden, who have entirely left the physical realm behind. Credit to Loki for helping me develop these ideas through various discussions we had on the subject, so please follow Loki's socials for more Souls insight, which I will link below. One of the great conflicts in Bloodborne story is the Great One's desire for surrogates to bear their children. The third umbilical cord reads as follows: "Every Great One loses its child, and then yearns for a surrogate, and Erden, the formless Great One, is no different. To think it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison." The fact that the Great Ones have lost the ability to reproduce makes perfect sense. As their bodies evolve to become inhuman and eventually completely intangible, they would naturally lose the ability to reproduce in the traditional sense. There is a point to this discussion, I promise, and it has to do with the latter part of the item description, which talks about Erden's interaction with blood. We obtain this specific third umbilical cord from Arianna after she has spent the night of the hunt in Erden Chapel. It's clear that Erden Chapel is a location where the Formless One is present, because as the night progresses, the pale blood moon erases the barriers between the cosmos and the material world, and Arianna becomes a surrogate for Erden's celestial child. The important element I want to focus on is that it was Arianna's corrupted blood that acted as the perfect medium for this liaison. There are hints that Arianna shares the vile blood of the Cainhursts, and we learn that those with corrupted blood, the Blood Queens, are the best surrogates available. Their blood isn't vile in the traditional sense, rather it is more potent and concentrated, making it easier for the Great Ones to interact with it. I highly recommend Last Protagonist's video on this subject, as it is fascinating and a great resource for understanding blood in Bloodborne. I find this interesting because the Formless Mother is also an eldritch, intangible being that interacts with blood and has a greater connection to the vile bloods of Elden Ring's universe, the Omen. The idea that Omen blood has some level of potency comes from a few sources, starting with the Morgott boss fight. In the second phase of the fight, the grace-given Lord of Lanedale can no longer contain his blood, and curses us for staining the thrones with it.
"The thrones, stained by my curse, such shame I cannot bear. Thy part in this shall not be forgiven."
The potency of the blood is clear, as it bubbles and roils like a pool of hot water. Morgott is even able to tap into powers associated with the Formless Mother, similar to the Bloodflame Talon attacks that Mohg uses. Presumably, Morgott, as a staunch defender of the Golden Order, has not actively communed with the Formless Mother, suggesting that he has instinctively tapped into her power due to his Omen nature. We could also consider the example of the reborn Radahn, who has used Mohg's cadaver as his new physical form. Again, we know that Radahn would never have had any contact with the Formless Mother, yet he is able to naturally tap into her power because of his new Omen body. To me, all of this suggests that the Formless Mother has a particularly strong connection to Omen blood. She communes through blood, and thus the more potent the blood, the better. This is why she was able to commune directly with Mohg during his exile in the Shunning Grounds, an event we learn about through the Blood Boon, which reads, "The Mother of Truth craves wounds. When Mohg stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and he was besotted with the defilement he was born into." This paints a very vivid scene, and this item description in particular inspired Eugenia's renders for this video. Notably, this communion did not seem to involve the spilling of blood. Rather, the Formless Mother was able to commune with Mohg directly through his own blood, setting it ablaze, again reinforcing the connection between the Mother of Truth and the potent blood of the Omen. As an aside, I take this description to be quite literal. We know the Formless Mother's blood can manifest as blood flame, and as such I believe she did the same to Mohg's in order to alert him of her presence. Her connection to blood is so strong that it can even lead to physical transformations, and I will soon discuss the blood fiends and manflies, both of which I believe are examples of how the Formless Mother can manipulate physiology when the connection is strong enough. We can also see this in Mohg himself. In the second phase of his fight, he communes directly with the Formless Mother, and she rewards him by granting him a full pair of wings. If you look at his back, you can see that he already seems to possess a pair of useless, stubby wings, similar to those of some misbegotten. So the Formless Mother didn't grant him wings per se, rather she grew something Mohg already had on his body. One thing is clear, the Formless Mother can grant those with Omen blood incredible powers. A demigod backed by an outer god is a force to be reckoned with. Such is the case with Malenia and Mohg, arguably the two most powerful demigods left, given Radahn's reduced state. The corrupting power of blood is so strong that it can even affect the Elden Ring and its runes. We see this in the case of Mohg, whose once golden great rune has become drenched and warped by his accursed blood. The power of blood and the influence of the Formless Mother are fully realised in Mohg, and they are forces to be reckoned with. Given what we've discussed about the Omen and their blood, it makes sense that the Mohgwyn Dynasty is one bound by Mohg's blood. We witness this transfusion firsthand when we become a pure-blood knight. During this moment, we see Vare take our hand and inject something under our fingernail, causing us to experience great pain. This is confirmed by the item we gain, the bloody finger, whose description reads, "Glistening blood has been siphoned into the nail of this finger. Its sickly pale skin feels nothing now, but the nail still aches with the sweetest pain." This isn't just any item like the other usable fingers. It is our own finger, transformed by Mohg's blood. Mohg's blood has been siphoned into our finger, changing us forever and binding us to the dynasty and the Formless Mother. The transformative effect of the blood is further reinforced by the change in our eyes, one of the three events that can permanently alter their hue, in this case to a murky red. We know this blood is likely Mohg's Omen blood because other members of the dynasty, such as the Sanguine Nobles and the Albinorics, seem to bear the horns of the Omen, suggesting that all members of the dynasty share Mohg's blood. This makes sense for several reasons, primarily because it makes Mohg's dynasty a sort of artificial dynasty. To clarify, traditional dynasties are usually family trees connected by royal blood, while Mohg's dynasty is connected through the shared blood of its members. Given that Mohg's dynasty is a makeshift one, united more by ideals or circumstance than by birth, it is through the act of transfusion that it becomes connected by blood as well. Additionally, if Omen blood serves as a medium through which the Formless Mother can interact, then each member of the dynasty is brought closer to her through this transfusion. This process is integral to the Mohgwyn Dynasty, and is the reason Vare was brought into the fold. We learn this from the War Surgeon's gown, which reads, "Of the surgeons abducted by the Lord of Blood, none were able to tame the accursed blood. None but Vare, that is, though he was an exception. Vare and other surgeons were captured by Mohg, so he could have someone with medical training to perform the necessary transfusions. Vare was the only one to master this process, and as such, he holds an extremely important position in the dynasty. He is both the recruiter and the master of ceremonies for the induction process. So what does this tell us about the Formless Mother and the Outer Gods as a whole? Outer Gods seem to be eldritch, cosmic entities centered around a particular element or concept, whether that be rot, death, chaos, or blood. In prior lore videos, I attempted to align the Outer Gods with the Japanese concept of kami. I came to these conclusions by working with translator and community member Mirko, who has worked with the likes of Sabaku no Maiku. And while my interpretation of the Outer Gods has evolved since, I do still highly recommend this video as we explored some very interesting ideas here. By the way, massive shout out to Sabaku and the Italian Souls community. I would highly recommend his content any day of the week. Kami are essentially spirits or gods that are part of nature and manifestations of the particular elements they represent. My mistake in that earlier interpretation was focusing exclusively on this natural aspect, excluding the cosmic elements. Instead, I now believe the Outer Gods are both. They are cosmic beings that also manifest and represent elements existing within the material world. It is clear that each Outer God vies for dominance by spreading its influence through its chosen material and intermediaries. Everything associated with the Formless Mother suggests that her primary desire is for blood to be spread, whether through the wounds inflicted on herself via communion, or through the blood spilled by the bloody fingers of the Mohgwyn Dynasty. I believe this is the essence of the Formless Mother. She is simply the deity connected to the power within blood. While this may seem simplistic, consider how important blood is to every life form. It is the vital fluid that runs throughout the body, just as the Formless Mother flows around reality. As for the title Mother of Truth, consider that beneath everything, titles, heritage, social class, and flesh, we are all just blood. There is nothing truer than our blood once all else is stripped away. The strength of the Formless Mother's connection to blood is well explored in the shadow of the Erdtree DLC in several instances. Let's begin with the Blood Fiends, the most overt connection to the Formless Mother found in the expansion. The best starting point is the item description of the Outer God Heirloom, which reads, "A talisman engraved with the lore of an Outer God. The clan, who lost everything in the Great Fires, peered upon the corpse of their ancestor, normally an act of sanctity, and saw in its shadow a twisted deity. The clan had suffered such torment that the horrible thing was taken as an object of worship." This item clearly depicts the moment when the ancestors of the Blood Fiends first made contact with the Formless Mother, heavily implied to have occurred after the Crusade of Mesmer, as it refers to the Great Fire. It then describes them gazing upon the corpse of their ancestor, but instead seeing a twisted deity. This twisted deity is confirmed to be the Formless Mother in the description of the Hexer's Ash. The corpse of their ancestor is likely a reference to the tutelary deities found throughout the lands between, who are often depicted holding revered spirit ashes in their hands. We can learn more about them through the description of the revered spirit ash, which reads, "Spirit ash of those who came before, infused with potent spirituality, acquired from the corpses of Hornsent and other objects that richly decorate townships and villages across the realm of shadow. The withered corpses were called tutelary deities, and revered spirit ash was said to quietly accumulate in the palms of their hands." I covered this subject in detail in my Hornsent video, but in short this is a Hornsent practice of honouring the dead. These figures are what the Curseblades aspire to become, though none have yet attained this status. It seems that while the people sought comfort and guidance from their local deity following the brutal subjugation of their tribe, they somehow connected with the Formless Mother instead. Even more intriguing is the suggestion that their current monstrous form is owed to the Formless Mother, as described in the Hexer's Ash. Long ago, a subjugated tribe discovered a twisted deity among the ravages of war, and they were transformed into blood fiends. The Mother of Truth was their saviour. I mentioned the blood fiends and their transformation in my Hornsent video, which sparked an interesting discussion. Some viewers suggested that the blood fiends were once demi-humans, rather than Hornsent. Shout out to viewers like Clevey for bringing this idea to my attention. Reasons cited include the fact that both have red eyes, both drop string, Both roar before attacking, and both can be baited. Additionally, we do see demi-human tribes within the Lands of Shadow, including those led by a queen on the Cerulean coast. However, with all that said, and acknowledging that it is a strong possibility, I still lean toward the Blood Fiends originally being Hornsent. The main reason for this is the event described by the outer god Heirloom. This tribe sought to honour their ancestor, the tutelary deity, and as highlighted in the description of the revered spirit Ash, this is specifically a Hornsent practice. To me, this almost outright states that it was a Hornsent tribe who turned to one of their revered deities in a time of great distress. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Either way, it is truly extraordinary that the Formless Mother possesses the ability to transform life forms in such a way. To me, this transformation seems to be an extension of her ability to manipulate blood. Additionally, as we've discussed, I believe the Formless Mother has a much stronger connection to the more potent blood of the Omen. My interpretation of the Hornsent is that they share physiological similarities with the Omen. Due to their exposure to the Crucible, they too have sprouted horns, and the only reason the Omen are considered Omen is because they were born in an era where the Crucible's prominence had been supplanted by the Erdtree. As such, if the Formless Mother has a stronger connection to the likes of Mohg and Morgott, wouldn't it also make sense that she has a stronger connection to the Crucible-touched Hornsent, to the extent that she can manipulate their blood and bodies? In my opinion, this isn't the only instance of the Formless Mother warping the physiology of the Hornsent. As I suggested in my Hornsent video and accompanying short, I believe the Formless Mother is behind the fly ailment that has spread throughout the Lands of Shadow. We know that the man-flies found throughout the Lands of Shadow were once Hornsent because of the man-fly ashes, which read, "Afflicted Hornsent eventually metamorphosed into a fly-like form. It was believed that at the moment of transformation, they were relieved from their suffering." My reason for believing that this isn't just a random disease, but rather a malady spread by followers of the Mother of Truth, starts with the ailment talisman, which reads, "When the weak were infected with the dreaded fly sickness, they perished well before the metamorphosis could take hold. Oddly, those who cared for the infected and made certain they were given a proper burial were never afflicted themselves." I find the language used here very interesting, particularly the suggestion that it is odd that those caring for the sick somehow didn't catch the disease. In medieval times, before personal protective equipment, doctors often succumbed to the illnesses they were treating. So why didn't these healers catch it? I suggest the reason is that these healers were not true healers but cultists in service to the Formless Mother, purposefully spreading this disease. Firstly, we know that flies are relevant to the Formless Mother, as they seem to breed in the fetid blood swamps of her domain. This is hinted at by blood-tainted excrement, and outright stated in the Swarm of Flies incantation, which reads, "Releases a swarm of blood flies before the caster to assault foes. The new palace of the Lord of Blood lies in a swamp of festering blood, and these flies are said to spawn from excrement in that land." Indeed, in the lower moats of Belurat, where many of the man-flies reside, we can see something of a blood swamp brewing. However, unlike the blood flies of Mohgwyn Palace, these flies were not birthed from eggs, but rather were Hornsent transformed by what is implied to be a fungal infection. I believe the infection to be fungal because of the fly mold item they drop upon death. The item description reads, "A species of fungus known for its deathly sweet stench, found by hunting man-flies, cultivated using the flesh and blood of man-flies." But why do I believe the healers mentioned in the ailment talisman are actually responsible for this? What proof do I have beyond the language used in the item description? I look to the placement of the man-fly enemies. In many instances, the man-flies are accompanied by another enemy type that stands out from the swarm, unique Hornsent spirits. At first I thought these spirits were randomly placed, but as is often the case with From Software, very little is done without intent. These spirits are unique because they can not only buff the man-flies, but also cast Swarm of Flies. That's right, these Hornsent can use an incantation specifically associated with the Formless Mother, conspicuously while in the company of these poor transformed souls. I therefore suggest that the healers mentioned in the Ailment Talisman and these black spirits are one and the same. They are cultists of the Formless Mother, spreading this fungal infection under the guise of healers. As for their purpose, we can only speculate. Perhaps it helps spread her influence if the man-flies are her creation, and connected to her domain. Perhaps the way these flies interact with the environment also spreads her influence. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below, but ultimately, I believe that if the Formless Mother were to be victorious and her influence spread further, more humanoids would be transformed, resulting in a vast landscape of blood swamps inhabited by man-flies. While the utility of the man-flies to the Formless Mother is open to interpretation, the Blood Fiend's usefulness is readily apparent. Like the Mohgwyn Dynasty, they have their own religious practices that, in a pragmatic sense, serve the Formless Mother's goal of bloodletting. As such, we find similar practices to those of the Mohgwyn Dynasty. For example, instead of the Gothic Mohgwyn spear, the Bloodfiend Hexers use more rudimentary fork-like implements that ultimately serve the same purpose. The Bloodfiend's sacred spear reads, Great Spear of the Bloodfiend Hexers, one of the most significant implements used in their blood rituals. Sacred spears of blood are the instruments of communion with an outer god. The Mother of Truth desires a wound. Like the Mohgwyn spear, the Hexers are able to commune with the Formless Mother using a specialized instrument to wound her and spread her blood in the material plane. This blood is then used in further Bloodfiend rituals. Communion with the Formless Mother is not a matter of talking or praying. Rather, it is the spilling of blood, usually her own, and it is easy to understand how her blood flowing into the mortal plane facilitates interaction between her and her mortal followers. However, like the Mohgwyn Dynasty, mortal blood is also demanded by this religion. Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, only that it does. While the Mohgwyn Dynasty employs its fearsome bloody fingers to spill the blood of others, the Bloodfiends seem to rely on blood sacrifice, even upon themselves. The second of the Bloodfiend's specialized implements, the Bloodfiend Fork, reads, Weapon used by the Bloodfiends. 3 tines of carved bone spear the victim to provoke blood loss. A ritual implement for blood offerings to the Formless Mother. At times, the Bloodfiends will spill even their own blood using these forks. The Bloodfiends' penchant for sacrifice and bloodletting is reflected in one of their main sites of worship, found in Rivermouth Cave, which is actually one of my favourite side areas in the entire game. This cave contains a large congregation of Bloodfiends led by a chieftain, and the site features a sacrificial altar, with the entire area flooded with blood. As we see with Mohgwyn Palace and Rose Church, vast quantities of blood allow the Formless Mother to take root in the world and corrupt it. Additionally, it seems they may dismember the Bloodfiends they sacrifice, as implied by the Bloodfiend arm weapon. Cannibalism is also suggested, as if you look carefully at the Bloodfiends of Prospect Town, you can see them eating the flesh of one another. Furthermore, the idea that the consumption of flesh is intertwined with their worship of the Formless Mother is reinforced by the item Sacred Bloody Flesh, which reads, Raw meat soaked with blood, a delicacy of the Bloodfiends. The blood is said to have fallen from the Formless Mother's wound. Never will it dry, never will it rot. I also want to give a shout out to viewer Monsieur Dorgat for pointing out an error I made in my Hornsent video. In that video, I reflected on the Sacred Bloody Flesh, and implied that the flesh itself was that of the Formless Mother, suggesting a very intimate connection between them. However, as Monsieur Dorgat pointed out, it is the blood that comes from the Formless Mother, not the meat itself. The meat has been soaked in her blood. Whether this meat comes from the blood fiends themselves or from prey is irrelevant. What's important is that they consume both the blood of the Formless Mother, likely strengthening their connection to her. Such an act of communion could be seen as a dark parallel to the Christian practice of communion, where one metaphorically imbibes the body and blood of Christ. This ritual is no doubt a crucial part of their religion, as evidenced by its position on the altar in Rivermouth Cave. What could be more divine than consuming the blood of your god? In short, the Formless Mother has a long history outside the Mohgwyn Dynasty, with the same goal of spreading blood and expanding her domain and influence. However, these efforts pale in comparison to the Mother of Truth's greatest asset, Mohg, a being whose influence and power far eclipse that of her former servants. After all, he is a demigod with blood ties to the royal family of the Erdtree dynasty. Yet this dynasty rejected Mohg because he was born with the Omen curse. Mohg, like others of his kind, was born with horns that would have been considered divine during the reign of the Hornsent, but are now disdained. The Mohgwyn Dynasty is an ideological rebellion against the Golden Order's ideals. This is evident even in the induction ceremony for new recruits, where one is required to stain a white cloth with the blood of their own finger maiden. The symbolic meaning is clear. You are severing your ties to the two fingers and the Golden Order, and immersing yourself in blood. Even Mohg's Lucifer-like appearance and his position below ground, while his brother rules from the heights of Leyndell, is a clear thematic allusion to heaven and hell. Mohg has chosen to rule in hell, rather than serve in heaven, for this is the age of the Erdtree, thematically representing an era of civilization and refinement, whereas the age of the Crucible was one of violent evolution. To Golden Order fundamentalists, life should now converge into a singular, perfect form, much like the real-world concept of man being created in the image of God. Thus, the chaotic misbegotten and Omen are disdained for their lack of refinement, and are seen as lesser in this age of civilization. The era of violence, beasts, and evolution is viewed as a primitive time of the past. Yet these are only the surface-level reasons for the hatred toward the Omen. The deeper reason lies in their relationship to the Erdtree, or more precisely, their lack of one. This is something I have discussed numerous times on the channel before, so forgive me for covering well-trodden ground. I will try to keep it brief. The Dung Eater is an outcast who venerates the Omen, and it is their curse that he wishes to bestow upon the world. This is the aim of his horrific acts. The result of his practices is best explained by the Seedbed Curse, which reads, "Curse grown on a corpse killed and defiled by the Dung Eater, a tender pox afflicted with Omen horns. The Dung Eater cultivates the Seedbed Curse on corpses. By doing so, he prevents dead souls from returning to the Erdtree, leaving them forever cursed. One of the most loathsome things found in all the lands between. As I suggested in my Dung Eater video, he is likely named this because he devours or removes a soul from his victim's rear end, leaving the person soulless. In this state, they become disconnected from the Erdtree's cycle of life, death, and reabsorption. According to Golden Order dogma, anything disconnected from the Erdtree is to be reviled. This includes the Omen and artificial beings, two sets of life forms that lack the soul tying them to the nexus of life, the Erdtree. The difficulty arose when members of the royal family and aristocracy found their kin being born afflicted with the Omen curse. Naturally, someone of royal blood shouldn't have to suffer the same harsh treatment as common-born Omen. The fate of those like Mohg and Morgott is explained by the regal Omen Bairn item description, which reads, "Omen babies born of royalty do not have their horns excised, but instead are kept underground, unbeknownst to anyone, imprisoned for eternity." And so, Morgott and Mohg found themselves in the subterranean shunning grounds, the dumping grounds for royals who couldn't bear to kill their regal progeny, but couldn't stand the sight of them either. The risk of Mohg and Morgott escaping and causing embarrassment to the royal family had to be eliminated. To ensure this, the Erdtree authorities made use of special fetishes, individual items seemingly attuned specifically to the omen they were tethering, as both Morgott and Mohg have their own. The descriptions of these fetishes tell us they are bathed in golden magic. Indeed, when used, the ancient Erdtree sigil is cast upon the ground, confirming that these devices were crafted by the followers of the Erdtree. The abuse that the brothers would have endured at the hands of Leyndell's citizenry must have been cruel, as implied by the description of the cursed blood pot, which reads, "Throw at enemies to douse them in accursed blood, causing summoned spirits to assail them with a rabid fervour, a childhood memory of the Lord of Blood." Rather than interpreting it literally, that he was assailed by spirits in his childhood, I believe the effects of the pot are analogous to his experiences growing up. It suggests that Mohg was tormented by the people of Leyndell, angry mobs taunting and attacking him for being an omen. This raises the question of whether Mohg and Morgott once lived above ground, as the persecution of the omen likely did not happen overnight. The wording of the Crucible Gauntlets and Crucible Talismans suggests that over time, those connected to the Crucible's power were gradually pushed out of Erdtree society. Does this mean that Mohg and Morgott were allowed to live in Leyndell before the full-scale persecution of the omen began, given that it was likely a gradual process as attitudes shifted over time? I personally agree with Hawkshaw's interpretation of the omen persecution, as described in his Perfumer Lore video. He suggests that the perfumers initially sought to cure or heal the omen before some of them became omen killers. This may explain why perfumers like Trisha still act as caretakers for the misbegotten and omen, as this was their original purpose. This is an excellent video, and I will link it below and highly recommend you watch it. Additionally, we need to consider the twins' relationship to Godfrey. We know they are of the Golden lineage, as stated in the description of Morgott's Great Rune, but it doesn't specify if they are direct children of Godfrey. However, when we first confront Godfrey in front of the Erdtree, he says the following:
"It's been a long while, Morgott."
This implies that Godfrey once knew Morgott, and given that they are both of the same lineage, it more or less confirms that Mohg and Morgott were direct children of Godfrey. It also implies some contact between father and sons, especially when considering the phantom Godfrey that guards Leyndell. I've always assumed this is a creation of Morgott, given that it appears in a similar manner to his Margit projection, with a hue of golden light and the ancient Erdtree sigil. If this is the case, then it must be cast from Morgott's memory of his father, further reinforcing the idea that they had some kind of relationship. Does this support my earlier argument, that Mohg and Morgott may have lived in Leyndell as hatred for the omen slowly developed, until they were eventually exiled when anti-omen sentiment reached its peak? Or were they sentenced to the sewers from birth, with Godfrey simply visiting them? I lean toward the former, mainly because both Mohg and Morgott seem refined and intelligent, as one would expect from royalty. They don't strike me as people who have only known life in the sewers, living like beasts. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The rejection by their own family and the Erdtree Order is a core component in understanding both Morgott and Mohg's character development, as it shaped their worldview and choices in directly opposing ways. Morgott fully accepted the Golden Order's judgment of his condition. He looked up to the Erdtree, seeing it as something worthy of protection. During the Shattering and the subsequent period of stagnation, he became the truest defender of Leyndell, its people, and their ideals, while fully accepting that he would be vilified by them if they ever knew the truth. This is why he was the veiled monarch of Leyndell. Morgott ruled from behind closed doors, hiding the fact that an omen was in power. This idea would have been explored in a cut NPC quest featuring a character called Viscount Shaneheit. This noble of Leyndell would have asked you to slaughter the omen found in the sewers to impress the veiled monarch, only to discover that the king himself was an omen. In contrast, Mohg embraced his accursed nature, rejecting the Golden Order and seeking power through the Formless Mother. Through her, he gained mastery over blood magic, and harboured ambitions of establishing his own dynasty. We learn of this fateful meeting through the Blood Boon, which tells us that his meeting with the Formless Mother led to him becoming besotted with his accursed blood. It is easy to see why Mohg became enamoured with his own blood and the Formless Mother. He had nothing his entire life, was told to hate who he was, and yet here was an entity that empowered him through that very blood. There is no direct evidence of when Mohg escaped his underground prison, but I wager that both he and Morgott managed to escape after Marika shattered the Elden Ring. The disappearance of both Marika and Radagon likely threw the lands into chaos, allowing the two brothers to escape the sewers and pursue their destinies. The Mohgwyn Dynasty represents Mohg's ultimate ambition, to establish a new order with himself as its eternal ruler. In his blood-soaked subterranean palace, Mohgwyn Palace, Mohg gathers followers who worship him as their lord. However, the dynasty is built on a fragile foundation, with little hope of achieving lasting glory. It stands as a tragic testament to Mohg's unquenchable thirst for power, and the corrupting influence of the Formless Mother. In many ways, Mohg is no different from the other grasping demigods who were driven to conflict by the mad taint of their rune-granted power. They all wanted power. They all wanted to be the next lord. The key difference in Mohg's case is that he was sponsored by an outer god, giving him a very defined vision of the order that would replace the Golden Order if he were victorious. The Order of Blood, the Mohgwyn Dynasty. I've discussed this before, but the ruling bodies in the world of Elden Ring follow a specific structure. There is always a god, and there is always a lord. In this case, Mohg would assume the role of lord and become consort to a new god of blood, supplanting Marika. This is the vision Mohg and his followers share, with the Mohgwyn Dynasty structured as both a ruling body and an organisation designed to bring about its ascendancy. These are the two elements I want to explore further. As we discussed earlier, Mohg's dynasty is something new. Rather than being connected by blood through generations of lineage, it is instead bound by a blood infusion that unites its members. This is an intriguing concept, and though I may struggle to articulate why, I'll do my best. As I've suggested before, the Mohgwyn Dynasty acts as a counterculture to the Erdtree, which, in many ways, represents traditional monarchical rule. While Mohg also positions himself as a lord, his dynasty essentially accepts anyone, and anyone can be inducted into the royal line through a simple blood transfusion. Tarnished can become knights, and seemingly even sanguine nobles, nobility granted rather than inherited. The Mohgwyn Dynasty is a force constructed by the outcasts of Erdtree society, rejecting its definitions of nobility and royalty. It is a family bound by ideals rather than birth, and ultimately this can be seen as a rejection of traditional monarchy, akin to the rise of popular rule. This is why a large part of Mohg's soldiery seems to be made up of albinorics, those artificial life forms that are hunted and disdained by the people of the lands between. It's no wonder that some would be drawn here, perhaps with the promise of equality and fair treatment. It's likely they come via the portal found in the consecrated snowfield. After all, we see an albinoric standing outside the portal, as if considering entry. Another interesting thing about the portal to consider is that this is likely the route Mohg took in order to kidnap Miquella, not just recruit albinorics. It is a highly convenient location for Mohg, meaning he didn't need to traverse the entire continent, despite Mohgwyn Palace being the polar opposite end of the landmass to the Haligtree. We can assume that Mohg was likely the one to set up this portal, showing how well planned the abduction was. One could argue that Mohg made slaves of them, using them as fodder for his armies. But the point remains that they are at least welcomed into his dynasty, regardless of the circumstances of their role. That being said, let's not pretend that Mohg and his dynasty are humble rebels. Mohg's dynasty is as bombastic as Leyndell's, perhaps even more so. He is presented as Luminary Mohg, a grandiose title meant to elevate him as a messiah-like figure, and his clothing reflects this, as he opts for the robes of a messiah rather than armour. This flamboyance extends to the nobles, who are also dressed in rich robes and fight using a sophisticated and flashy sword style. Mohg is a driven character who deeply believes in his cause and the destiny bestowed upon him by the Formless Mother, but he suffers from hubris, much like the other demigods. The knights and nobles play particular roles within the dynasty. Firstly, we can assume they act as counsellors to the Lord of Blood, as nobility traditionally do in monarchies. Additionally, these positions are given out by Mohg in preparation for the dynasty's ascendancy, as indicated by the description of the sanguine noble robe. The grand metallic pattern on the shoulder is a signifier of the noble rank they intend to claim upon the advent of the new dynasty they are working to install. So they aren't full nobles yet, but they are poised to become the nobles of the lands between once the old order is swept away. However, there is a more sinister element to these two classes, as one would expect from a dynasty primarily concerned with the spilling and spreading of blood. We learn that the nobles also serve as assassins for the dynasty, as their hoods read, "Known to strike from pools of blood, these assassins are missionaries come to share the gospel of accursed blood." Once again, we see the remarkable powers granted by the Formless Mother at work. Her agents can become one with blood, moving from one point in space to another. We witness this more directly with Mohg himself. When we enter his chamber in Mohgwyn Palace, we see he is actually in blood form within Miquella's egg, only reconstituting as a physical being when we enter the room. I mention the bloody fingers because I believe they, too, use the power of blood to carry out their tasks, much like the nobles. Consider that after receiving our blood transfusion, we can use our infected finger to travel between worlds and attack other tarnished, spilling their blood in the name of the dynasty. Like the nobles in Mohg, we are using the power of blood to relocate spatially, as if we ourselves are becoming as mercurial as blood, moving along the veins of reality. Returning to the nobles, it seems they use this power to serve as effective assassins, able to strike wherever they are needed. This also explains the need to spread blood everywhere, as they seem only able to materialize in areas influenced by the Formless Mother, where blood corruption has spread. For example, we encounter them at Rose Church, Writhe Blood Ruins, and Mohgwyn Palace. Then we have the Pure Blood Knights, a role we ourselves can assume. We receive the Knight's Medal, which reads, "Proof that one is a glorious knight of the new dynasty of Mohgwyn, that the Lord of Blood will inaugurate. Used to be granted audience with Mohg, only it is not yet time. For Mohg yet slumbers beside the divinity. Be patient. The new dynasty is nigh." This shows the high esteem in which the knights are held within the dynasty, as they are granted full access to Mohg and the dynasty's headquarters via the medal. In the base game, we don't get much information about the organization of knights, but this is one area the DLC expanded upon, as we actually meet another knight, Ansbach. Ansbach is actually the leader of the Pure Blood Knights, as we learn through dialogue from Lysa, who says the following.
"I'm afraid Sir Ansbach will have to be next. He insists that he's nothing but a worn-down over-the-hill soldier, but in his day, he was the feared commander of the Pure Blood Knights, who cleaved open Miquella the Kime with his blood blade."
From this, we learn a couple of things about the Pure Blood Knights. They were feared and they had a command structure. The Ansbach we meet now is a calm, reasonable, and honourable soul, perhaps he always was, but he was also once known for his fearsome combat abilities. We learn this through the Furious Blade of Ansbach, which reads, Incantation of Ansbach, Pure Blood Knight. Markedly different from the finessed swordplay of the Dynast, this is an aggressive last resort incantation that gave rise to Ansbach's fearsome reputation. This teaches us quite a bit about both the dynasty and Ansbach himself. First, it tells us that the dynasty is known for the finesse of its swordplay and warriors. Indeed, the nobles we face fight with grace while using the bloody Hellas, embodying the bombast we mentioned earlier. However, Ansbach broke this mold, discarding pretence and focusing solely on winning fights, unleashing his power like a savage animal. Yet, I believe Ansbach also offers a glimpse into the sense of honour that could be found within the Mohgwyn Dynasty. Ansbach is one of the few people to respect us despite our tarnished status, even referring to us as honourable. Perhaps all of the pureblood knights adhered to Ansbach's ideals of honour. Ansbach shows what it means to be a knight: honour, respect, and loyalty to one's liege. Even after learning of his master's death, Ansbach is determined to honour Mohg by putting the reanimated corpse of Mohg, which Radahn is piloting, to rest, standing by your side against the promised consort. Though Ansbach's path puts him in conflict with his former companions, he treats each combatant with respect and courtesy. Ansbach represents both the best and worst of the Mohgwyn dynasty. He is compassionate, honourable, and respectful, but he is also a blood-soaked warrior who taps into dark powers to destroy his enemies. It would have been great seeing the pureblood knights in their prime when Ansbach was their commander, acting as advisors to the Lord of Blood. However, it seems that Mohg eventually rejected the advice of those like Ansbach when he became enamored with Miquella. Before we move on, I want to discuss another core element of the Mohgwyn dynasty: the bloody fingers. As suggested in prior chapters, the dynasty's agents are primarily concerned with shedding and spilling blood, as the Mother of Truth desires a wound. Thus we have the bloody fingers, the red phantom invaders. I believe that while there are different classes within the dynasty, such as knights and nobles, all can become bloody fingers, regardless of their position. This is evident as we see sanguine nobles, like Nereus and the unnamed noble of the consecrated snowfield, invading as bloody fingers. It's important to remember the bloody fingers when considering the noble and honourable aspects of the Mohgwyn dynasty. Despite any virtuous elements, many of the dynasty's recruits are bound by one thing: their desire for blood. We've spoken of Vari earlier, and how he was the only surgeon to master the accursed blood. However, there is another benefit to Mohg recruiting these individuals: their penchant for bloodletting. These war surgeons like Vari served on battlefields, and we gain insight into their sinister nature through the dagger talisman, which reads, "The white-garbed field surgeons come to the aid of friend and foe alike by dealing a final deadly thrust to spare them from the prolonged agony of a mortal wound. A sense of mercy is a catalyst for bloodlust." The implication here is clear. Despite their training and role, these surgeons were little more than mercy killers, scouring battlefields and finishing off the wounded. In doing so, they became bloodthirsty killers over time. While Vari took on a prominent role in the dynasty, the other surgeons are little more than killers, who stalk the blood swamps of the palace and invade our world as bloody fingers. Then we have Eleonora, the Drake Knight. It is implied by Yura's dialogue that Eleonora was a Drake Knight who became consumed by the practice of dragon communion, wishing only for conflict. As such, it makes sense that Mohg would grant her the power to indulge in this desire. Blood-crazed warriors like Okina and Eleonora are unlikely to be the most loyal servants of Mohg, but they still serve a purpose for him. He gives them the ability to invade worlds, and in return, they spill blood. Whether it is for him or for themselves, the blood flows regardless. Then, of course, we have the most notorious of all the bloody fingers, Okina, an unmatched swordsman from the land of reeds. I have spoken about my theory regarding the Land of Reeds in previous videos, but in short, I believe that the Formless Mother and/or the Bloodstar have parasitically latched onto a conflict in the Land of Reeds. We hear of this conflict through the Land of Reeds set, which reads, "The Land of Reeds has long been locked in a miserable civil war, during which time it has remained alienated from the cultures of its neighbours. Little wonder that the entire nation has succumbed to blood-soaked madness, or so it is said." This speaks of a civil war, and given that the Land of Reeds is clearly this universe's version of feudal Japan, I believe this civil war is an allusion to the Sengoku era, a time of violence and internal conflict, previously explored by From Software in Sekiro. However, while it is described as a civil conflict, I've always found the term blood-soaked madness to be an interesting choice of words, as it aligns with the language Yura uses regarding the bloody fingers.
I am Yura, as you might recall. Hunter of bloody fingers, tarnished, held in thrall by cessblood. Zealots, who stalk their own. If you stay the path, you are certain to face more of them.
Incidentally, I find Yura's use of the term cessblood here to be very interesting, as it is obviously a reference to the corrupted blood of Mohg that runs through the veins of the bloody fingers. He has in-depth knowledge of the dynasty, and it is clear that he also believes that it is the accursed blood that has made slaves of them, that has twisted their minds, and that they are little more than thralls. A sort of blood-crazed insanity goes beyond simple warfare, and is exemplified by Okina himself, who is described as a demon. Okina's mask reads the following: "The more he sharpened his mind, the more the absurdities of the world came into stark relief, and so Okina renounced it all, and rose to a higher plane. There was only himself, his katana, and its mastery. Before long, Okina became a demon of a swordsman." Okina no longer fought for a cause or a lord. He became nothing more than his blade, killing and fighting for the sake of it, and for that purpose alone. So possessed was this demon by his desire for blood that he would even strike at Mohg himself, as we learn from Rivers of Blood. There are further pieces of circumstantial evidence that could imply the Formless Mother's influence in the Land of Reeds. Consider that the signature weapon of the Land of Reeds, the katana, is focused on causing blood loss above all else. It's not hard to imagine that the intense spilling of blood in one land would draw the attention of the Formless Mother and the Bloodstar, with the red thorn shield of the samurai starting class serving as evidence of the latter's presence. As an aside, I do not believe the Bloodstar and the Formless Mother are the same being. I have discussed this in detail in my Bloodstar video, so I would direct you there. But in short, there are too many key differences in the behaviours of the two entities, though they both commune through blood, hence why they were both drawn into the Lands of Reeds conflict. Additionally, we must consider Yura himself, who is clearly from the Land of Reeds, given his Ronin attire and helm, which are based on designs from that region. The fact that he is a Ronin suggests that he is now masterless, perhaps having abandoned his allegiance in the Civil War to pursue a new purpose, the hunt of bloody fingers. Yura is very familiar with the bloody fingers, and if he truly comes from the Land of Reeds, it could be because it is a breeding ground for new bloody finger recruits, those like Okina, who may be manipulated by the Formless Mother. This being could be exacerbating the conflict to keep the blood flowing, allowing her influence to grow, even beyond the lands between. Ultimately, no matter their origins or role within the dynasty, the bloody fingers serve a single, simple purpose: spilling blood and expanding the influence of the Mother of Truth. With that said, let us discuss Mohg's abduction of Miquella, a key component of his goals and a turning point in his story, as this did not go as Mohg had planned. As I have discussed in prior videos, the ruling order of this world is always composed of two members, a lord consort and a god. The Dragon Lord once was the Lord Consort to a god in an order that predates the Erdtree rule. In the age of the Erdtree, Godfrey and then Radagon were consort to the goddess Marika, and so Mohg's new order will also mimic this structure. One god and one lord. Mohg would rise as the Lord of Blood, but he also needed a god of blood. When the Shattering broke out, Mohg took advantage of the chaos to infiltrate the Halig Tree and snatch the slumbering Empyrean, a scene shown in the game's opening slides. We know from Ranni's words, those elected as Empyrean are considered suitable for godhood.
I was once an Empyrean, of the demigods. Only I, Miquella, and Melania could claim that title. Each of us was chosen by our own two fingers, as a candidate to succeed Queen Marika, to become the new god of the coming age.
So Mohg's options for a god of blood were limited. The three active Empyreans were the ones mentioned by Ranni. Ranni herself, Melania, and Miquella. In many ways, Miquella was the obvious choice for Mohg to target, as he had almost no chance of subduing the powerful Melania. And we know from Rogier's dialogue that Ranni was likely absent for much of the Shattering. I want to clarify something here. Many have interpreted the new lore to suggest that Mohg is innocent of kidnapping Miquella, based on the lines from Ansbach. Ansbach tells us how he came to be here. He saw that Mohg had become enchanted by Miquella, and that in fact Miquella was using the Lord of Blood for his own ends. In desperation, Ansbach struck out at the Empyrean, and it was at this moment that Ansbach fell under Miquella's spell.
Once, in an attempt to free Lord Mohg from his enchantment, I challenged tender Miquella, only to have my own heart rather artfully stolen. I knew not how weak I was. I believed that with sufficient mastery, even an Empyrean would be within reach of my blade. I could not have been more mistaken. Miquella the Kind is a monster, pure and radiant. He wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
So it's clear that Miquella did bewitch Mohg, and that this somehow derailed Mohg's plans. Miquella used Mohg to enter the lands of Shadow, using Mohg's corrupted blood to remove his grace, thus allowing him access to the lands of Shadow. All this time, Mohg believes he has been waiting for Miquella to awaken as his god of blood, when in fact Miquella has long vacated his mortal form, and Mohg is essentially in possession of a useless body. Miquella would also use Mohg's corpse after we slay him, with his agents bringing the Omen's corpse to the Gate of Divinity, so that Miquella could infuse the cadaver with the soul of the reborn Radahn.
As if using Lord Mohg to gain entrance to the land of Shadow were not enough, he plans to use his corpse as the vessel of his king consort. He has forsaken Lord Mohg's soul. He desires only his empty shell. It beggars belief, but I'm afraid tender Miquella fails to grasp the humiliation implied by this act. One thing is certain. My dear lord deserved better.
However, I think people have misunderstood this to mean that Mohg would never have kidnapped Miquella had he not been charmed, given that Miquella ultimately used Mohg to access the lands of Shadow. While it's true that Miquella charmed and used Mohg for his own ends, we must consider that Mohg still needed Miquella for his own purposes. My suggestion is this. Mohg initially intended to kidnap Miquella of his own volition, but Miquella turned the tables on Mohg. Mohg wanted to establish the Order of Blood, and for that, he needed Miquella. It would seem like an elaborate and unnecessary setup if Miquella had always had Mohg charmed. Why would Miquella charm Mohg, then cocoon himself, only for Mohg to then kidnap him? The logic falls apart at that stage. So, in short, yes, Miquella did use and charm Mohg, but only after Mohg had kidnapped him in the first place. If Mohg wanted to kidnap Miquella anyway, why does Ansbach hold a grudge against Miquella for manipulating his lord, enough to attack Miquella? I think that while Mohg did intend to take Miquella, it was from a position of ambition, and kidnapping him was just one component of his plan. However, when we meet Mohg, he seems besotted with Miquella, infatuated with him, something that goes beyond mere utility. In my view, Ansbach's anger stems from his realization that Miquella had ensnared Mohg under his thrall. Mohg was no longer advancing the dynasty's agenda, as the Pureblood Knight medal reads the following: "For Mohg yet slumbers beside the divinity. Be patient, the new dynasty is nigh." Mohg is still slumbering beside Miquella, suggesting he has been inactive for a period of time, slowly corrupting Miquella's form with his own accursed blood. Mohg was likely charmed into believing he was transforming Miquella into the god of blood, but in reality he was advancing Miquella's plans by corrupting his body so that Miquella could pass into the lands of shadow. As I noted earlier, Miquella has actually long departed this body, and so Mohg essentially is in possession of a worthless artifact. Perhaps he would have realised this had he not been bewitched. This folly was actually hinted at in the base game, even prior to the new lore of the DLC, for Mohg's remembrance reads the following: "Wishing to raise Miquella to full godhood, Mohg wished to become his consort, taking the role of monarch. But no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber he tried to share, he received no response from the young Empyrean. The reason he got no response was because Miquella had long got what he wanted and left the material plane. Miquella made a fool of Mohg, and he didn't even know it. Seeing his lord trapped in a delusional state, and the dynasty stagnating, Ansbach acted and attacked Miquella, only to be charmed himself. This is why we don't encounter Ansbach at Mohgwyn Palace. He has already been charmed and entered the Land of Shadows at Miquella's suggestion. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if Mohg had succeeded in transforming Miquella into the God of Blood and in replacing the Golden Order. What we see in Mohgwyn Palace and its surrounding blood swamps is likely a preview of what the world would look like under Mohg's rule. Festering blood swamps, a system that encourages bloodshed and a twisted form of honour. Corrupted beings such as blood crows, dogs, blood fiends, and manflies would populate these lands. This illustrates the nuanced nature of Mohg and his followers. The dynasty is essentially a blood cult that would bring great corruption and bloodshed, yet there is a nobility in Mohg's leadership that inspires loyalty, even love, among his followers. In many ways, Miquella had already toppled the Mohgwyn Dynasty before we even arrived. Gideon's description of Mohg as deluded is accurate. Under Miquella's influence, Mohg led the dynasty to a dead end, left to rot and stagnate, much like the blood that surrounds the palace itself. That is, until the Tarnished arrives at Mohgwyn Palace, where we challenge Mohg for his great rune, finally bringing the delusion to an end. Ansbach's delusion also ends when Miquella disposes of his great rune, causing his powers of bewitching to dissipate. Those loyal to Miquella remained loyal, but those who were compelled to follow him had a rude awakening, as if emerging from a nightmare. Ansbach remembers everything Miquella did to his lord, and is now compelled to uncover the truth of Mohg's fate and restore his honour. Bound by his code of chivalric honour, Ansbach does not hold any ill will toward us for killing Mohg. This was an honourable showdown between two competing lords, which we won, and as such Ansbach cannot fault us for following the same path.
Oh. Something you want to get off your chest? Well, you needn't worry. It was you, wasn't it? Who defeated Lord Mohg. Fear not. I bear no grudge against you. His Eminence was felled in an honorable duel, and such are the risks of seeking lordship. Besides, what right have I to complain? I blame the enchantment more than anything. Righteous Tarnished, we will have our victory. I swear upon my blood.
However, what Ansbach really blames for Mohg's downfall is the enchantment, again suggesting that Mohg wouldn't even have fallen to us had Miquella not controlled him. To add insult to injury, Miquella's people have now desecrated Mohg's corpse, and thus Ansbach sees it as his final duty to his lord, to put his cadaver to rest. It's interesting that Ansbach is aware that they moved Mohg's corpse to the Lands of Shadow, suggesting that he and other members of the dynasty are keeping an eye on Miquella's agents. The last of the Mohgwyn Dynasty keep their vows, even though their lord is defeated and their ascension is impossible. Ansbach fights alongside us against Miquella's agents to finally put Mohg to rest, thus keeping his honour. Additionally, if you fail Ansbach's quest, another sanguine noble comes to assist us in the battle against Lysa and her allies, showing that the dynasty is aware of Miquella's actions and does not forgive. With his last breath, Ansbach addresses the Tarnished, delivering one of the most memorable lines in Elden Ring history.
Righteous Tarnished, become our new lord. A lord not for gods, but for men.
I think Ansbach's line here has a lot of depth, and I want to finish off this video on Mohg by dissecting it a little more. On a surface level, it reflects everything he has witnessed. Ansbach is genuinely afraid of Miquella and his power, and who can blame him? While I believe Miquella's intentions are pure, he wants to make the world a gentler place. His power is terrifying. As Ansbach says, Miquella wants to improve the world, but he is doing so by force.
Miquella the Kind is a monster, pure and radiant. He wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
He is shriving clean the hearts of men, meaning he is making them better, but also erasing everything that makes them who they are. I'm not here to cast moral judgment on what is right or wrong in the world of Elden Ring. I'm simply presenting things from Ansbach's perspective. The other interesting angle is that this is coming from a man who once served a demigod seeking to establish a rule under a god of blood and an outer god. And yet here we have Ansbach now declaring his desire for a rule free from the gods, an order that furthers the interests of man, rather than upholding the rule of gods. Ansbach was a loyal man, dedicated to the Mohgwyn Dynasty, and thus to the gods. But with the collapse of his faction and the death of his lord, he has gained new clarity and perspective. The horror and failings of Miquella have led him to a new way of thinking, one that seems to align more closely with the ideas of Gold Mask. I'm reminded of the Rune of Perfect Order, which states, "The current imperfection of the Golden Order, or instability of ideology, can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods no better than men. That is the fly in the ointment." While Gold Mask arrived at this conclusion scientifically, almost mathematically, Ansbach has reached a similar understanding through his experience and philosophical reflection on the gods. Of course, there are still fundamental differences between Gold Mask and Ansbach. Gold Mask is focused on removing the gods from the equation while upholding the Golden Order, with all its prejudices and authoritarianism. Ansbach, on the other hand, seems to want an order for men, perhaps one that adopts the positive elements of the dynasty without the bloodshed or gods, the chivalry, loyalty, and willingness to accept anyone the Golden Order would discard, be they Omen, Albinoric, or Honourable Tarnished. So thank you everyone, that is my take on Mohg and the Formless Mother. I'd like to once again take a moment to thank Eugenia Lysa for going above and beyond with this commission. I love the Formless Mother and the surrounding lore, and I like to imagine what the Order of Blood might have looked like had Mohg succeeded and converted Miquella, as well as imagining that fateful meeting with the Formless Mother that took place in the subterranean shunning ground, and both of these were brought to life spectacularly by Eugenia. So again, please check out her channel and her socials, which will be linked below. With that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, especially if you have any thoughts on what I've just discussed, and let me know what you'd like me to cover next. But until next time folks, I will see you in Mohgwyn Palace. Take care and have a wonderful evening.